قال مرقس البشير: وصل يسوع وتلاميذه إلى كفرنحوم، ولما دخل البيت سألهم: بما كنتم تتجادلون في الطريق؟ فظلوا صامتين، لأنهم تجادلوا في الطريق في من هو الأعظم. فجلس يسوع ودعا 12 وقال لهم: إن أراد أحد أن يكون الأول فليكن آخر الجميع وخادم الجميع. ثم أخذ طفلا وأقامه في وسطهم وضمه بذراعيه وقال لهم: من قبل باسم واحدا من أمثال هؤلاء الأطفال فهو يقبلني، ومن يقبلني فلا يقبلني أنا بل الذي أرسلني. حقا والأمان لجميعكم.
للمسيح يسوع التسبيح والبركات من أجل كلامه الحي لنا. للمسيح يسوع التسبيح والبركات.
مجد الله. Brothers and sisters, we find ourselves at the beginning of a new liturgical season. Whenever I begin my homilies, I always talk about the liturgical seasons that they teach us. Each gospel in the liturgical season teaches us a new message, gives us a new image of Christ and how to live, and day after day, week after week, this message becomes more and more complete. So the message of the season of the exaltation of the cross this season is the glory. So the glory that we find in the wood of the cross. If we remember Saturday when we read the gospel for the feast, for the exaltation of the cross, we heard of the foolishness of the world. You know, the leaders of the world are foolish. They go after earthly glory. Yet when they look at the cross and when they look at suffering, they think Christ and the apostles are foolish because they don't understand that through suffering and death, we don't win temporary glory, we win eternal glory. Now, continuing this message of opposites winning and opposites being greater than what we expect, we heard yesterday Sunday's gospel where he tells the apostles, you will sit with me in my glory. They ask him, can we sit on your right and left in your glory? And he tells them, yes, you will sit in my glory. But you have to accept the cup that I drank from, and you have to accept my baptism. So he was telling them there is glory for everyone who follows him. For every single one of us that follows Christ, there is glory. Only if we accept the path of the cross. So the cup he drank, which is a cup of suffering, and the baptism he had, which is a baptism of fire or the baptism of death, if we accept those in the path that Christ walked, and we cross the cross as a bridge, then we have the glory of Christ himself. We sit at the right and left hand of Christ. Now that idea is very important for us. The cross is a bridge. And only if we pass the bridge can we enter into the glory that Christ speaks about, into his glory. If we choose not to pass the bridge, well, there might be earthly glory, there might be worldly glory, but eternal glory becomes very, very hard. And today, in today's gospel, this idea of finding glory continues. We hear the apostles were arguing themselves. Who's the leader between them? Who's greater? Who has more glory between them? And Jesus overhears. And he reminds them that anyone who wants to become first, or anyone who wants to become the leader, has to become the servant. We hear this always. Christ came to serve, not to be served. God humbled himself to serve, to save every single one of us, and not to be served. So he tells them, none of us are greater than the master. None of us can be greater than the person we're following. So he tells them, you have to serve the community, you have to serve everyone else if you want to be a leader. But he takes one step forward. Keeping with the idea of foolishness, keeping with the idea that our earthly knowledge doesn't understand God's knowledge. He takes a child and puts the child in the center and says, if anyone wants to be glorious or have glory, he has to be like this child. What's this mean? Do we have to act like a child? Do we have to think like a child? No. What characteristics does a child have? Trust, purity. They rely on the parents, so they're reliant on God. Innocence, obedience, willing to learn. As foolish as it may seem, as odd or backwards as it may seem, the only way for us to reach the glory of being true leaders like Christ, the only way for us to reach the true glory, which is life through the cross, is if we become foolish, if we become like children, relying on God for all things, trusting in God for all things, having the innocence of God in all things and the purity of God in all things. Brothers and sisters, we grow in wisdom. We study. We go to TAFE. We go to university. We have our degrees, our certificates, our diplomas, and we become wise. Can we say we become wise in God or in earthly things? Because it's only when we take a look at the cross like a child, when we see Christ's hands open, not in suffering, but welcoming us on this path. If you look at Christ and the cross through the innocent eyes of a child, through the purity of a child, through the reliance of a child, then we see this as a throne, where God sits, arms open, welcoming every single one of us across the bridge and the path to salvation, across the bridge and the path to life eternal. Brothers and sisters, let us take the example of a child and be foolish. Let us take the example of the child and live in joy and innocence. Let us take the example of a child and rely on our Father like we rely on our parents for all things. Let us rely on our Father to lead the way and not worry about the world, not worry about the supposed wisdom that we need or the things we need in life. Because if we become like this child that Christ chose and we look to the cross and find glory, then the path is clear. The path is clear for us to live our life like Christ, live our life with Christ, and live our life through Christ, so that in the end we can hear him say, sit at my right and sit at my left, because you have entered my glory. Amen.